Okay, we are live. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Holy Humanist. Happy Saturday. I don't often do streams on Saturday, so this is a massive privilege for me as well, because we are joined by Jason from Atheist Alliance International. If any of you have seen, I think it's been way back now, but I did an interview with Jason quite a while ago, which focused a lot more on my story. And, we spoke a little bit about Jason's time overseas and in Pakistan, and we kind of talked about food and that kind of thing. But I thought today would be a good opportunity to delve into Jason's story a bit more, obviously, and get kind of a feel for how he ended up as part of Atheist Alliance International and what they're trying to do, and just what's happening in that sphere of things. So Jason, welcome. Thank you for being here, despite our massive time difference.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
No worries. If you could just tell my viewers a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Okay. So currently, I'm the blog manager and podcast host for Atheist Alliance International, of which you were one of my guests a few months ago, as you mentioned. So a little bit more backstory. So I grew up in Canada, where I attended a moderate Protestant church throughout till I went off to university. Uh, in my early teens, I had a born again experience. I was going to a Baptist private school and had like the evangelical experience. And so for about a year or so, I was sort of brainwashed as an evangelical. And then as I got out of that school and back into the mainstream, I kind of came back to more moderate Christian views, and then went off to university, as many of us do, and then stopped going to church altogether. Uh, while I was in school, I studied business, but my electives were in history and religion. So I took world religions, I took Islamic history. So it's quite eye-opening. As university is, it tends to be quite eye-opening. And so I came out of university. I would say, like reflecting back, that I still believed in God. I guess I would have classified myself as a deist by then.
Jason, sorry, can I interject for 1 second? I'm just
Sure.
really curious. When you were studying world religions at university, you said you came out still believing in God. Did you have like any moments of crisis as you were studying that, or as you were like reading,
No,
everyone's got their own?
no, it was just informative to learn about the different things. So some of what I learned is still with me, and it helped me to recognize, like, the book I'm working on now, which we can come back to later. One of the most interesting things, we actually did a subset on the Native American religion and how, like, their views of nature, which I found very, very fascinating. Like, but there was no really moments of crisis. It was just really cool to study, like, the Hinduism and Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, that kind of stuff, the Native Americans. So it was quite cool.
Yeah,
Um,
what a fascinating module.
yeah. So I came out of university. I was pissed off at religion. My parents were asking me at the time, like, why don't you want to go to church anymore? And I couldn't really quite find the words to articulate it. But my brother is several years older than I am, and I guess he'd sort of been through the same journey, and he was able to crystallize it perfectly. He said he sees what goes on in the world in the name of religion, and it pisses him off. And I went, yeah, that's pretty much it. Um, so then, I, as you do, you're thinking about things and world issues. And I remember it was around the mid 90s. I think it was Rabin that was assassinated, the Israeli prime minister, by a Jewish zealot, basically. Well, not even a Palestinian. It was one of his own people who had killed him. And I sort of came to the realization on my own, as many other people do, that religion is very arbitrary. It's very subjective. It depends on what family you're born into, what society and culture you're born into, that you're raised with these views. And it just made me realize, like, how silly the whole thing was. That, like, if you've been born to Jewish parents but put up for adoption and raised by a Christian family, like, so what's the point?
It's like Ricky
Um,
Gervais says, how convenient that you were born in the right religion.
yeah. And so then, into my 30s, I was still an agnostic. Like, I guess I moved from atheist to become an agnostic, and so I've kind of been, like, on this entire continuum of belief, from evangelical to moderate to deist, agnostic, atheist. So, and then somewhere around my mid 30s, I realized one day, oh, I just don't believe anymore. Like there was no aha moment or no, it was just I realized, I just didn't believe anymore. And then I got into I was already living overseas. I moved overseas in 2003. So first I went to the I worked in the US for 5 years in the late 90s, and then when the tech bubble imploded, I came out to Asia in 2003, and I was on an expat forum um, for Hong Kong, and there was in the local news some of these. It's probably not so much prevalent in the UK as it is in the US, but the creationists in the classroom, where these evangelical teachers don't want to teach they don't teach evolution in biology classes because they think it's the work of the devil, and they want to teach the Genesis creation story, and so they're always looking for ways to circumvent the separation of church and state in the US by injecting creationism through other means into classrooms. And this was sort of becoming an issue in Hong Kong. There were some evangelical teachers in Hong Kong who were trying to get this into Hong Kong classrooms, and it sparked this huge online debate. And I was having multiple, like I noticed that my answers were just getting longer and longer and longer. And somebody challenged me, like, instead of, like, some snide flippant, one line dismissal of their beliefs, like to back up what I was saying. And I ended up writing like 3,000 word like essay challenging all of their beliefs. And I thought, hey, there's a book here. And so I started writing my first book, which came out about 10 years ago. It came out in 2013 at Easter. I published at Easter 2013, called Manifest Insanity, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Think for Myself, which is a play on Dr. Strangelove. And it's a satirical commentary. It's set in a Christian high school in Kansas, right in the Bible Belt. And as the kids go through the classes, so they go through biology class where they discuss evolution and creationism, and into Bible studies class, history class, civics class where they discuss women's rights. And I present all of this historical information to challenge the Christian right narrative that the Bible is literally true and without error. So it originally just started off sort of as a counter to the evolution claims that the Christian right were making. I thought, well, hey, there's more to the creation story. Like we can really deep dive into all of these beliefs. And so I go quite heavily. Like, so I actually break, instead of just one Bible studies class, I have 3 Bible studies class. I have Old, New Testament, and then I have the sort of the aftermath of what happened in Christianity after the time of Jesus, and how Christianity has changed and evolved. Because many Christians, and probably with every religion, a lot of people think that their religion is sort of static, that the beliefs they hold today are the same beliefs that have been there from the beginning. And that's just not true. Like, the beliefs shift and change and evolve over time. Islam, maybe not so much. It's been much more rigid, because I think they saw what happened with Christianity and Judaism, and how it got warped over time. So that they really insisted that, we keep the translations, and you don't get those problems. But Judaism, Christianity have vastly evolved over their lifetimes. And so I present all of this history in the book. And then, so I published the book, and I had my online presence. And then Michael Sherlock, who's the past executive director of AAI, had reached out to me as a fellow author and atheist activist, and we got connected, and we were cross-posting each other's content. And then when he became the executive director, he asked me to join AAI, and I came in and took over managing the blog. So as a writer and an editor, so I could edit people's copy and post it. And then I came on as a guest on the AAI podcast, and then sort of joined. After that, I became a sort of a guest co-host, and then I just ended up taking over as the host, because the original host was he was busy with his work. Plus, he took over as host of Atheism UK. So yeah.
Okay, wow. And honestly, Jason, when you were saying, like, your entire journey, it is almost like you went through every single stage, and then boom, you started publishing books. And again, that point you made just there about Christianity and Judaism, they have vastly changed from what they were. And it is because a lot of those beliefs have been left behind, or like chucked to the side, if you will. But as you said, like with Islam, it's a bit different. And because I never miss an opportunity to say why Islam is so problematic. But it's exactly as you were saying, because it is considered the literal word of God, and it has those massive claims for itself that it's timeless and eternal, and it's the perfected religion, and Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, that it just makes it almost impossible for it to go down that reformed aspect, or it's going to be there's going to be a lot more hurdles, because a lot of Muslims won't be on board with that. How can you start saying that the literal word of God needs to be taken less seriously or not followed in some ways? That's like a massive question mark on the entire fabric of Islam. So yeah, but what I was going to ask you is, what kind of, I mean, did you, once you started speaking out, as in you gave that massive response to somebody challenging their beliefs, and then you were like, oh, there's a book here, and then you kind of, actually came out and delved more into it and put books out there, were people that once were, friendly or in your circle because of certain beliefs you had, was there any backlash from them? Were people trying to hush you and say, why do you need to be
Not
doing this? Why have you gone down this path?
not so much. The one of my childhood friends. She was a teacher. She's a family friend of my parents. They had been she had been my fourth grade teacher, and her husband had been the minister at the church that I was attending, the moderate Protestant church, when I went through this sort of evangelical conversion at a Baptist school. And she was a bit shocked. I mean, I don't think she was upset, but I think she was a bit shocked to see the transformation from seeing that evangelical 14-year-old to, this man in his 30s and 40s who's like, this, ardent atheist. But she was very supportive. My wife at the time was a Catholic. She was not a practicing Catholic, but she was fearful of my everlasting soul, that I was going to burn in hell, for doing this. She was asking me like not to post stuff on my Facebook profile because her family would see it. And I'm like, that's not my problem. If they learn some facts, maybe it'll be good for them. So I'm not going to censor myself for the sake of your family. So
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Um, no. So yeah, obviously, there's varying levels of how people react, and I think genuinely the movement we've got going in on YouTube for the ex-Muslim community, there's just insane amounts of shunning, and the only thing that I've seen comparable to that is a series on Netflix recently, which was covering like the Hasidic Jews, and that I honestly thought was comparable to an experience of somebody, especially in an Islamic country, trying to leave Islam. And so much so that like exactly what you're talking about, like a post not to offend family members versus a post that will get you on death row, is like, there's a massive gap there. But yeah, so in your experience, when you talk about Islam or you have discussions about Islam, do you notice more of a backlash as opposed to when you speak out against other religions, or you delve into history and state facts that people might not necessarily like?
not really. I mean, it depends on the person, but I think, as you mentioned earlier about the Islam is the literal word and sort of stuck. I think I genuinely believe that the Islamic Reformation is coming. That the access to information on the internet, like kids are growing up with in the information age. I also think that the number of atheists and non-believers in the Muslim world is vastly underreported because they can't speak out, but they're there. I mean, I worked in Pakistan. I talked to these people. Some of them, they wouldn't necessarily speak openly to their own people, but they felt very comfortable speaking out to me about their non-belief. I did have one guy get really pissed off at me in Pakistan.
Oh
He
no.
was talking. He was talking about how Islam. We were having dinner. He was a vendor of the company I was working there with, and we went out for dinner. And I wasn't afraid. I was speaking my mind, and I was just giving facts. And he said that you know the end times prophecy, like when God intervenes in the final battle with God and Satan, like how this is a Muslim philosophy. I went, no, it's not. And I said, it's in the Christian, the Christian New
Doctrine.
Testament, the Book of
Yeah.
Revelation. The Revelation is all about the end times battle. It also comes from the Zoroastrians. Like, it predates Islam by 2,000 years with the
Yeah.
Zoroastrian end times. How can you say? And he got really upset with me. He's like, "Well, you shouldn't say things that offend me." And I went, "Why not?" He's like, "Because it hurts my feelings." I went, "There's no law against that." And he went, "Well, there should be."
Technically, there is one in Pakistan, so you've got to be careful, Jason.
Yeah.
Oh my days!
Yeah.
Wow. I hope that ended there, right? Did that?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it was that was like the only thing, but I just challenging his beliefs. So, but
Imagine if he was to contact you all these years later and say, you know what, I actually just did a Google search and it turns out you were right. This has
yeah,
made me question my entire faith. um, but yeah, no, exactly. You're told not to question, right? It's the devil whispering. It's the devil getting into your mind. You were actually forbidden from questioning. The Quran actually says like there are things that are beyond human understanding, like matters of the soul, for example. That's only for God to know, and it basically just stunts you asking questions about just beyond life and like God and where God came from and where our soul goes and what is a soul and all of that. So they just nip it in the bud.
yeah.
But yeah, so in terms of yeah, it's just so when you say you think that the Reformation of Islam is coming because children now have all of this information readily at their fingertips, right? Like it is true, the saying that in the age of information, ignorance is a choice now, and like you can have access to that. We've got all the Islamic sources, which when I grew up, had no idea. The Hadith were like some mystical big collection of books on a bookshelf of the mosque or the Imam's house, and now it's like 3 clicks away. But when you say the Reformation is coming, do you mean in a way because the young generation will be abandoning Islam in a way, or do you actually think there's potential for Islam as an ideology to reform and Muslims who practice it?
I think with the information that's coming, there'll be fewer and fewer adherents. There'll be more people being outspoken as non-believers, but I think as the number of non-believers swells, there'll be less power available for the conservative elite to control the narrative. Like, they just won't have. They will lose that power base. They're drawing on the support of the majority to stunt the conversation and to control the narrative. And I think as the demographic shift, that power base is going to evaporate, and there's going to, like happened in Europe several hundred years ago, the politics will be less influenced by the religion, and there will be more space opening up for some um, serious scholarship to take place. It's already happening. I was reading my notes this afternoon before this podcast to refresh my memory. The New Cambridge Encyclopedia of Islam, which is fascinating, some fascinating history in it. You you could, I don't know if you still can, you could find it on archive.org if you want to go and look up some of this stuff. Um, and one of the scholars had made a point that Islam, the scholarship of Islam, up until sort of the fairly recent contemporary times, had generally accepted what Islam had said about its own history. It's only been like the last maybe generation or two that there's been some really serious scholarship that was questioning those claims and has really started to do some actual scholarship into the history, and how some of the early claims of Islam that had been accepted are now being challenged by mainstream Muslim scholars in the West, and which of course is going to upset some of the more hardliners in the Muslim countries. But the facts are coming, and history is a process. There obviously weren't a lot of written records, in 600 and 7th century. So it's can be hard to tease out some of these things, but the modern Western scholarship around Islam seems to be getting much more rigorous, and there's been a lot more factual scholarship going on So if any of your viewers are watching, I would highly recommend the Encyclopedia of Islam. It's broken up into chapters, so you can like zoom in if you want to like just read a specific topic, but it's quite interesting. So I think it's 6 volumes, but I only read sort of the first volume on sort of the early history of Islam, how it evolved, and like what were the socio-political conditions at the time that it formed, and its early years. So it's quite fascinating history. So for the people who love history like I do, and how religions form and evolve, it's really interesting. So
Yeah, I think we actually on my streams with Lloyd, I think he's actually kindly provided the entire encyclopedia in that archive. So if one of the mods could pin it into the chat, that would be great. But yeah, that archive, it is there, and as Jason is saying, it is fascinating to actually go through that. And also the breakdown of words. You see Islam from very different angles based on how they have defined certain concepts, and the way it's trickled down to the lay Muslim is so different from what it's actually perceived to be in its original form, as the scholars had intended to use it back then. But yeah, as you're saying, because as you said, Western scholarship is now getting a lot more rigorous. We find holes in the standard narrative that has been kept under wraps for so long. And I think the more that we see, like, I mean, even when you question as you said, the origins of Islam, but like, the origins of the Kaaba, the actual birthplace of Islam, and you bring in to question Mecca, you put Petra on the map, you put Yemen on the map, you put the Ethiopian influence on the map, it really does start to, piece together a very different version of Islam that most Muslims think is like just this continuation and perfected end of the monotheistic faiths. I'm really just I'm a bit disappointed, because before the Western scholarship could even get their hands on actual archaeological evidence and try and verify Muslim claims about where things were historically around Mecca and stuff, the way that the Saudi government has approached this, and obviously not given them permission for so long, and now kind of just built over the whole area. We see that massive Rolex tower in Mecca, and we just see hotels. They've built the Hilton and stuff. So that whole area around the ground mosque as well, where there's meant to be, the remains of Abraham, there's Muhammad's footprint, apparently, there's a hairpiece, there's the cave where he met Gabriel, the mount, like all of these things are now just being bulldozed over. And you would think that if this is your actual history that you claim to be the actual truth, then let Western archaeologists in, and let's verify it. It would make things a lot easier. But I fear that opportunity has now been missed. But I hope, obviously, that the scholarship that's happening can overturn that anyway. And then let's hope it's a combination of what you were saying, obviously access to information to the young generation, that combined with putting more emphasis on critical thought at school, and then them being intellectually honest with themselves when it comes to reading the facts and reading the history and analyzing history with a critical mind, and realizing that history is written by the victors, and let's look at the other side, and let's take some of these stories into context and see what was happening. This is an actual massacre of a Jewish tribe. Like, we need to talk about that. It's problematic.
yeah.
So yeah. And Jason, I am a bit more curious about, just to go back a little bit to you studying world religions. I just wish if I had more time on my hands, that is the course I would love to study. So for you, what was the most fascinating religion or concepts, or what was the most intriguing?
Well, as I mentioned, the Native American Indian was quite interesting. Like their sort of naturism, I guess, would maybe be the right word. Like how like the sun rises in the east, so like that brings the light, and the rains come from the west, and the snows come from the north, and sort of this cycle of interdependency was quite interesting. The Buddhism I found to be quite interesting as well. Ironically, one of my classmates was Hindu, and we were doing a group project in one of my business classes. And I was mentioning we were doing the Buddhist section, and this Hindu girl is just, oh, they're just weird. Like, okay. So even though
We're
Buddhism
right,
comes
they're
out of
all weird.
India, like
Yeah.
Buddhism comes out of India, Hinduism comes out of India, and you just dismiss them as weird. It's like, okay, have you looked at like your blue elephant god and all the multi? Like, okay, if you can be that dismissive, and okay. So it was interesting. So I mentioned briefly. So my new book is called Dangerous Ideas, and it's a history. I was intrigued about 3 years ago that I was reading a book, a very comprehensive book on the history of Christianity, and I was getting up into the 1800s and 1900s, and he was talking about the emergence of atheist thought and people who were challenging the Christian narratives and power. And I thought no one's really done a book like this comprehensive for atheism. And I thought, like, a few hundred years ago, we were killing people for daring to speak out. And now we have Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris, the Four Horsemen, the late Christopher Hitchens, who are global celebrities. It's like, how could we have gone from that extreme of killing people to global celebrity? Like, so there, again, like I thought, hey, there's a story here. Like there must be a path that, we went in step to get from one extreme to the other. So I've been charting that. And I started in the middle of my book with a chapter on Spinoza, because Spinoza was very influential and wrote a book with an intriguing title called The Theological Political Treatise. I thought, okay, so that sounds really interesting. So I started with him, and I'm reading Spinoza, and it immediately jumped out at me, having studied Buddhism in school, having lived in Asia now for 20 years in Buddhist countries, in Buddhist cultures. And I'm reading Spinoza, and like within minutes, it just jumps off the page that it's completely Buddhist what he's talking about. And so I emailed the professor who wrote the biography that I was reading, and he says, no, he's a Greek Stoic. And I'm like, no, it's not Stoic. This is Buddhist. So a friend of mine in Canada from one of my good friends from university is now a philosophy professor himself. So I emailed him and I said, hey, is there any connection that's discussed about Spinoza and Buddhism? So he did a Google search, came up with an article written by a professor here in Bangkok. So I read that article, and then I reached out to this professor, and I went to meet him for coffee, like just as COVID was exploding. And in his article, he talked about the fact that there's only been like 4 professors in the last 100 years who've really talked about this. And he's like, the Buddhism is so obvious. Why aren't more people noticing this? And so he gave me a book by one of his former professors called The Greek Buddha, which tied all the pieces together. So when Alexander went into India, with him was a Greek scholar named Pyrrho, and Pyrrho became a Buddhist and brought it back to Greece. But it wasn't Buddhism, it was Pyrrhonism. But Pyrrho never founded his own school, but he did influence the Stoics and the Epicureans. And it's not the Stoic that Spinoza follows, it's the Epicureans. So there is a direct link from Spinoza to Epicurus to Pyrrho to Buddha. So there's a long stream.
Fascinating. Yeah. Because so what made you think that this is beyond just like, a deistic God or pantheism or whatever? Where did you think this is actually, there's something more here that links it to Buddhism in Spinoza's work?
It was just his philosophy in general, like just everything he was writing. It's just, and I came across a quote by Schopenhauer, and even Schopenhauer, I don't remember when Schopenhauer lived exactly, but it's been a couple hundred years. Even he said Spinoza would be at home on the banks of the Ganges. So even he recognized this, and yet it's not widely recognized. I was reading a book by Jonathan Israel, another professor, and even he said, a lot of professors and scholars do sort of make this link to Stoicism, but if you look at Spinoza's cosmology, it's not Stoic, because the Stoics believed in a creator deity that influenced the universe, whereas Epicurus included the gods, but they were not the creators of the universe. They were just another type of being who are in the universe who are disinterested in us. So the cosmologies between Spinoza and between the Epicureans and the Stoics is quite different. So and then
wow.
And right around the time I recognized the connection to Epicurus and Spinoza, I Googled the two, and sure enough, just that very month, a book had just been released called Spinoza the Epicurean by a professor in Australia. So I reached out and contacted him, and we had a long conversation. He actually sent me a copy of his book for my research. So.
Oh my gosh, that is fascinating. I've honestly, I had no idea about that. But yeah, we'll plug your books at the end as well, because I'm gonna get myself a copy. We have a question here from Horace Sultan. He's saying, what does Jason think about the age of Hinduism? Does he think Hinduism is 10,000 years old, as modern Hindus claim?
Yeah. So I did. So when I was writing that section, by the way, hi Harris, thanks for your question.
Yeah, hi,
When
Horace.
I
Thanks for
when I
stopping by.
when I was researching the bit on Buddhism, so there's a little bit of Hinduism in his thinking as well, not a lot. Uh, the my chapter on classical, like the book each chapter is an era. So chapter 1 is classical antiquity, chapter 2 is the rise of the Vatican, and chapter 3 is the Reformation. It's still all in progress. I'm still working on chapter 2. It's taken me like well over a year to document the Vatican's rise of dominance. Uh, but when I was doing that bit on Spinoza and the Buddhism, I was getting into the Hinduism, but also in the classical antiquity, because you see bits of Parmenides, like things that are in the Upanishads show up in Parmenides. And so you look at there's something called the Hindu synthesis, which took place around 1000 BCE to 800 BC, somewhere in that range. So if you've ever studied Hinduism, there's actually like three creator deities in Hindu. There's Shiva, um, there's Vishnu, and there's Brahma. So why do you have three? So, and that's where the Hindu synthesis comes from. Like you have the Vedas, the early Vedas, like in what's it, the about 2000 to 1500 BCE.
Is that the
Um,
Manusmriti and stuff in that era, or does that come later?
the which?
The Manusmriti or something. There's a couple of these books. I mean, I've completely butchered that name, but I don't know.
Yeah, so
But
you
these
have
are
the
the early Vedas, yeah, like the
yeah, well,
most
you
original
have
text.
the Vedas first, and then I believe, and forgive me if I get this wrong, I think then the Upanishads come next, and then
Okay,
finally you get the Bhagavad Gita last, I
okay,
believe. And maybe I mix up the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads.
okay. Yeah, that's
Uh,
it. Manusmriti
and
comes later. Okay, thanks, Horace.
right, so then you have around, say, 1000 BCE, you have this Hindu synthesis where they sort of merge and mash all of them together. So there really isn't a Hinduism per se that you could point to, uh, probably prior to 1000 BCE. So you'd be prior to that, like you said, like you have the Vedas, and then you have various within the Vedic schools. The Vedic tradition, you have various schools as well. So it would probably, and I'm not a Hindu scholar, but I would say it's probably pretty hard to say that you could probably point to the Vedas and say this is definitively Hinduism. I mean, there's probably some precursors in there that got absorbed into Hinduism, but it's definitely not that old. So
Yeah, thank you. I think this is an interesting comment. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this, Jason, but um, it says original Buddhism is totally different from secularized Buddhism, and Gautamaji called his doctrine Brahmayana, or the path to absolute.
this is where the book I mentioned, the Greek Buddha, really is a fascinating book. I would recommend people read it. The He makes a very clear distinctions. This is Professor Christopher Beckwith who wrote the book. And Beckwith makes a very clear distinction between what is called early Buddhism, which is the Buddhism of the Buddha, and what it evolved into, which they call normative Buddhism, which took place over a couple hundred years. And it's in normative Buddhism that you have the aspects you have today of karma and uh, maybe I don't know if it's correct to say there's a heaven and hell in Buddhism. I think that's probably incorrect, but and even these narratives, like the backstory of Buddha, like that he was born of a prince who was sheltered in the palace to keep him from suffering, and all of this comes hundreds of years later, in the normative Buddhism era. But if you look at what early Buddhism was, it was essentially Greek skepticism. It was, you reserve judgment. There is no absolute. There is no light. There is no dark. There is no absolute truth. It's the middle path. You reserve judgment, and there was no karma, there was no right and wrong, there were no gods. It was uh, so secularized Buddhism is probably more going back to the fundamentals of what early Buddhism really was compared to what normative Buddhism evolved into. Because normative Buddhism sort of incorporated back into it some of the Hindu concepts of karma and things like that. So
Yeah. Awesome. No, thank you. And just this one as well, because you have been in Asia for so long. This is interesting because it is a concept. I mean, I see it. So sorry, Josie Wales is in the house. Thank you for being here. Josie said, in Japan, the Buddhist shrine is next door to the Shinto temple. Weird, like they're borrowing from each other. Could you imagine a Christian church next door to a mosque? Actually, there are places in the UK where there is literally a church, and then the building next to it is a mosque. And I have seen that at play here, but again, that would only happen in a secular
But
Western
I remember
democracy.
reading a few years ago about Japan that Buddhism is for life and Shintoism is for death. So
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, and that makes sense. You borrow from life and death are very much intertwined. Um, but yeah, so okay, well, I'm going to round up with what your thoughts are in general about atheism and everything that you guys are doing there, because you're doing amazing work. Some of the conversations that you're having, the experiences you're bringing to light. But I did want to just pick your brain for a moment and say, what do you honestly, where do you kind of position the origins of Islam and how it kind of just came to be from, its very beginnings and Muhammad and all that jazz?
okay, so that's I was rereading the sections in my notes on the history of Islam. So if you look, and this one of the points I make in the first book, Manifest Insanity, is religion is entirely political. That was probably the biggest revelation for me when I was researching and writing, was the the entire Old Testament and significant parts of the New Testament. It's nothing but a negative campaign ad. It's politics. Every story is politically motivated to slam like the out group. Um, so when you look at the history of Islam, again, it's very socio-political, and the history is quite fascinating. So I think you and I mentioned on our previous podcast. So and you touched on it earlier in our earlier conversation about the word. So in the New Cambridge History of Islam, one of the scholars mentions that the word Quran and the word Surah are not Arabic; they're Aramaic. So
Mm.
and this professor's like, you look at geopolitically, where is Saudi Arabia located? It's directly south of not only Israel, but where the Syriac Christians are living. Uh, and then you go deeper into that. And so in northeastern Saudi Arabia was the Lakhmid tribe, which was a vassal state of the Sassanid Persians, who were Nestorian Christians, so Eastern Christians. And then in the northwest of northwest of Saudi was the Ghassanids, who were vassal states of the Byzantines. Uh, so you've got two strains of Christianity, one Chalcedonian imperial Christianity and one non-Chalcedonian and non-imperial Christianity. Uh, and then you mentioned as well, like the Ethiopians, and you have in Yemen, you have the Himyar tribe, uh, and then you have uh, Jewish tribes and some Christian tribes uh, in like around Medina. I think there was some quite powerful Jewish tribes.
Yeah, Yathrib, I think it was then. Yeah.
So you have quite extensive, not only Christian and Jewish influences in Saudi Arabia, but you have very powerful political in the northeast and northwest vassal kingdoms for the two different empires, for the Byzantine Empire and the Persians, the Sassanids. So you've got very strong geopolitics going on. And one of the points that they make, so for like 20 or 30 years, the Byzantines and the Sassanids were at war with each other right when Islam was forming. So you fight this 30-year protracted war, and both sides were pretty much exhausted. And at the same time, you have the rise of the Muslim army, who sweep up out of the Arabian Peninsula and conquer the Persians within a very short period of time. Not only because they were necessarily weak, but you've got this sort of missionary zeal behind the Muslim armies who conquered Persia in short order, but they could have just as easily have turned west and conquered the Byzantines instead of going after the Persians. So
Yeah. Oh,
there's a
amazing.
lot of there's a lot of geopolitics going on, and
Exactly.
you mentioned Petra and like so. Originally, Muslims prayed towards. Some people say Petra, some scholars say Jerusalem, but then in a nod to the power base, the Quraysh in Mecca and the Kaaba, they switched the direction of
Yeah.
prayer to Mecca because it was a politically pragmatic decision to make.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts, because there are so many varying, people are like just looking at one region with a lens, and then if they've got enough evidence, they're claiming that this is the actual thing. And you've got like varying theories out there. And I just wanted to know your thoughts. But what is plain to see, completely clear to see, is the very political beginnings and foundations of it. And honestly, the more that I am doing deep dives into Sharia law, I've been doing streams with Lloyd DeYoung, who's really like done extensive research into Sharia. And the more that, it comes out, you just like, it literally comes off the pages that it is a political totalitarian ideology that is trying to expand itself, and it's trying to kind of superimpose itself wherever it can go. So jihad and this entire kind of subservient thing and building up this Muslim army is very much embedded into its foundations. And as you said, all the politics, the geopolitics that were happening at a localized level, and the tribes and the empires and everything around it was influencing it. That's why you see Islam just, taking bits of Zoroastrianism, taking bits of Judaism, taking bits of Gnostic Christianity, fusing it all together, their old polytheistic ways. It's all everything that it's like a pick and mix depending on what was required to politically advance at that given point.
You look at the Kaaba, which had been the high holy site for polytheistic Arabic religions, and then so what do? They say, oh, Abraham and Ishmael, they built the Kaaba. So you can sort of diffuse the old polytheistic history and rebrand it and bring it into Islam.
That's exactly what happened. I think Muhammad just rebranded. He kept a little bit of the things that he liked from his former religion as well. Like, even the way they kiss the black stone and they circumambulate the Kaaba today, that was all done. Like half of the rituals that are done in Hajj today were, again, pre-Islamic pagan rituals. So yeah, it's a complete mess. Haris Sultan sent a super chat. Thank you so much, Haris, for your support. Excited for Sunday Scoop tomorrow. You feel free to ask a question, by the way. You're more than welcome to ask a question. Norse mythology as well. Thank you so much for your support. Norse mythology is saying this is in honor of little Catfee in the chat line, who is sick now and would like to donate. Oh, thank you. And I hope little Catfee gets better, rest up, and yeah, I wish you well. And Jason, I also wanted to, obviously you have spent time in Pakistan. So you're pretty much aware of just the general politics of it. In light of what you've seen happen recently, and maybe we can talk on a more macro level, let's say in light of what happened to Salman Rushdie recently, and that attack, and the more we see news reports coming out of Pakistan with the different factions and, the blasphemy law being misused day in, day out, minorities being at the receiving end of it really horribly, brutally at times. Where do you see this whole Islamic fanaticism going, and how does Pakistan play into that?
I think a lot of it, I mean, you see, I've made this point before that with Islamic fundamentalists, Jewish fundamentalists, Christian fundamentalists, I think a lot of it it's not necessarily rooted in religion. I think it's more rooted in socioeconomic factors, that these are disaffected people who were turning to religion sort of as a crutch. And it was quite interesting. I was watching Real Time with Bill Maher, which just aired Friday night in the US. And one of the guests was talking about Salman Rushdie, and he made the point. He says, was this kid because he was a Muslim fanatic, or because he was some disaffected young man who's living in his mother's basement? That there's this generation of angry young men who've got, they don't have job prospects, they don't have the money, they don't have they don't have the ability to they don't have the skills to date women, and so they're just frustrated and angry, and they're lashing out. So I thought it was an interesting point that he made. that the guy who attacked Salman probably had nothing to do with Islam. Is more the fact that he's pissed off at this crappy life he's leading and living in his mother's basement. So, and I think I made the same point as well. But you look at the Palestinian terrorists, like these people have been disaffected for 70 years now. That they've the Arab-Israeli war. They've been disenfranchised. They're left living in refugee camps. Like when you have nothing left to lose. So I think in Pakistan, and when I was in Pakistan was when Asia Bibi was released from the blasphemy charges and allowed to leave, and that there were protesters, and my friends there were saying, oh, these they're paid protesters. I don't know how much propaganda was like, oh, this is the Indian government paying protesters to go in and stir things up, but I don't know how accurate that was. I think that was just some propaganda, but I think there's definitely, I mean, you see it most amongst like the uneducated, the people who are easily swayed by these kinds of emotional, like the stick and the carrot that the religion uses. So you can get a lot of these poor, uneducated people, and that's exactly what the Catholic Church does too, right? They don't want birth control because the poor people who don't have birth control have more kids. It's control. So I think what you're seeing in Pakistan again is a reflection of there's quite a bit of poverty there. There's also quite a bit of wealth there too. The circle I was running in, these are all people with master's degrees who've all worked overseas. So they're all highly educated and with broad experiences, but you've got a large population that is quite they're easily swayed by this kind of fundamentalist zeal. I got caught up in it when I was 14 by these evangelicals. So some people just can't get out of it. Some people are lucky enough to break it, but some people just don't get out. So I think again, I think with information, I think Pakistan is probably going to change. Like all my friends kept telling me that Pakistan wasn't like this before. It was under Muhammad ul Haq, if I'm pronouncing it right, that he weaponized Islam to support his military junta.
Haq, yeah.
So they said like Pakistan was quite liberal and open before.
Same thing with Iran, same thing with Afghanistan. The women were a lot more liberated. Even like universities and things, you'd see such a balanced like representation between the genders. Like so many women were pursuing like higher level degrees of like master's, PhD levels, and were becoming professors, and it just all changed.
And you see them in Pakistan. You see women with that are going out with they're not covered. Some women are covered, some women aren't. Some are just wearing the headscarf. You see billboards for makeup, with women completely unveiled. So it was quite diverse in that regards. What was interesting to see was how many people opened up to me there, though, that felt comfortable talking to me, because I would have expected that maybe one or two, but I guess because if you've got a master's degree and you've worked overseas and your horizons have been broadened, your mind's a little more open. So
also, you're not part of the community that's like internally policing them, which is their own people. So you'd be a lot more comfortable telling somebody who's an outsider almost, because your own people are the very threat to you. And yeah, you make a good point. I just want to touch on you say that socioeconomic aspect also really lends itself into people being radicalized and things like that. But again, I'll always put the emphasis on Islam, because even if you're radicalized, let's say as an evangelical at most, as you were at 14, if you will, right? I don't know much about how gory the Christian doctrine is if you're an evangelical, but like I completely agree that socioeconomic factors play into account. So even if you look at somebody like Shamima Begum, who was basically radicalized at a very young age, in the UK, we see this a lot. It's people who are just sitting in their box room in their house, and they're online being radicalized by whatever mosque they have links with. And yeah, usually they're struggling in their social circles, or they're not doing well at school, or, you know, they struggle to maintain good relationships, or they just don't get on with their family, or they could just be having an identity crisis. I see that a lot in the UK, where if you, I mean, I had that initially. That's why I wore hijab, to kind of say I wanted to express my faith and try and, you know, make sense of that, because you're here as a British girl living in England, but you're meant to be a good Muslim Pakistani girl. And I'm like, how do those things fit? Because even within that, you shouldn't be making friends with Jews or hanging out with Christians, or, you know, pork, stay away from that, pubs for the devil. Like, I'm living in a country where I'm surrounded by the devil or whatever. So it's really hard to reconcile. And a lot of people, when they're going through whatever it is in life, or again, lack of opportunity, lack of skill set, lack of ability to upskill and move forward and progress, these people are willing, and this is their goal in life, is to prey on the vulnerable and the poor, as you said, and they use that. But if you're already in that state that's so vulnerable, to have something like Islam give you purpose and meaning when it literally says go out and kill people, and do it to get reward and to get your place in heaven, that is extremely like dangerous as a combination. Therefore, like, countering this radical like mentality is one thing, but then also saying this scripture is like, you know, mutually enhancing that, and that's a recipe for disaster. So yeah, I had another point there, but I completely forgot. I know. Sorry, did you want to say anything to that, Jason?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I had one more thought on that. I was gonna say something about that. Okay, I really can't remember, but yeah. So yeah, again, this is sorry. Yeah, the Salman Rushdie thing. So when you said, obviously he might have just been, you know, really frustrated and whatever, and he could have fallen victim to all of these things that we've discussed. At the same time, he definitely, this level of anger and, you know, of wanting to make purpose in your life is so perfectly filled in. That void is so filled by Islam itself. So whether it was his allegiance to, you know, the Iranian state and him like, let me take this fatwa into my own hands, or whether it was, you know, the Islamic scripture, or lack of purpose in life, or all of the above, that exactly plays out into a situation where people like Salman Rushdie in this day and age, when, as we think, like, from what used to happen back in the day to having the four horsemen, and now in 2022 Salman Rushdie is getting attacked like off the cuff just because he let his guard down once, having had to spend most of your life in hiding and then let your guard down just when you've got a semblance of normality again. It's just it was a massive wake-up call to me as well, because sometimes as you do this and you're sitting comfortably in your home, you forget that who's actually out there as the enemy that you've taken on, just by saying things that you and I have said today, Jason, just by saying like, oh, Islam was maybe politically motivated, you know?
Dangerous.
Yeah. We have Haris Sultan. I'm not sure if he wants Haris Sultan's asking a question. Jason, sorry. Does Jason think that new atheism movement, as it's labeled, is losing steam thanks to woo-woo people like Peterson and others who complicate reality?
I think new atheism has morphed a little bit. So when it sort of emerged, like in mid 2000s, with, you know, Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, and the Four Horsemen's books, I think people were kind of frustrated because they'd been a sort of a silenced minority for so long that it's really it had its sort of coming out moment. And we, you know, AAI gets criticism because now our mission has kind of changed from what it started in. We're getting a lot of criticism from people, that, you know, this wasn't the mission of AAI. Like, you know, we're doing a lot more outreach now to ex-Muslims, especially people who are trapped. You know, we're helping refugees get out of their countries to safe places when and where we can. Obviously, our resources are limited. So if anybody watching can donate, you know, we do a lot to try to help some free thinkers get out of dangerous situations and get to asylum. But we've received criticism from people for that was not what AAI was set up for. And it's like, okay, but the atheism movement, when AAI is set up, is not what it was today. Like today, it's much more focused on, we've had our moment, and now it's the ex-Muslims' time, and that seems to be where the movement is right now. As to Jordan Peterson, it's funny, the same Canadian philosophy professor I mentioned earlier, I think back in 2018, it came to my attention in 2018. It was actually while I was in Pakistan, sent me the links to Jordan Peterson's. He did a 12 or 13 part biblical series. And it was just complete horseshit from beginning to end. I actually wrote, I actually wrote like a 6 part deconstruction of the points he was making. That Steven Pinker tweeted it out, of me
incredible.
taking down Jordan Peterson.
Where can we find this? I would love to
Uh,
read this.
it's on my Medium link. If you go to Medium and search for Diogenes of Maybury, my author name, and then search for deconstructing Jordan Peterson's pseudo psychological religious bullshit or something like
Oh,
that.
I love
Uh,
that. Okay, yeah, if somebody
uh,
has noted that down, please pop it in the chat. Otherwise, I'll put it in the video description afterwards, the link to it, because yeah,
so
amazing.
so there's one Medium link there because Medium it requires that like you have like one article. So I have links, and in the Medium, my Medium profile as well, are the full 6 articles. So I dive into like where he makes like just some egregious bullshit. I actually like dive into it. Like he goes into the whole uh, why did the serpent in the Garden of Eden, like why is it a serpent? And he goes into this whole primal, snake predation on early humans. I'm like, what a bunch of psychological bullshit. It's like I said, why don't
Yes.
you look at Eastern religions? Like you look at that iconic picture of Buddha and like the cobra covering him, because snakes in Eastern religions are not evil. Uh, like the story of Adam and Eve actually comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a Sumerian story. So, and in that
Spitting
story,
facts, Jason. I love
in
this.
in that story, the snake is not evil. The garden is his place. The Eve is a goddess, and Adam is a visiting male. It's just like Jordan Peterson is such a moron. He needs to be taken down for sure.
My thoughts are completely mutual to you, but yeah, thank you so much. Horace Sultan saying Peterson sounds so smart, quote unquote, because that's important. When he's talking about gender issues, no, he doesn't. Yeah, that's why smart in quotations is important. But the moment he starts talking about Christianity, he sounds worse than your average mullah
Yeah.
or priest. Yeah, I mean,
Well, the point I called out, and I had several discussions with my friend. I think sad to say, our friendship has been maybe strained to the breaking point with him.
oh,
Um, Even though he claims to be a philosopher who only wants to care about truth, my attacks on Peterson, I think, have pissed him off so much, because he referred to Peterson as a national treasure. And every time,
far
his
from it.
meltdown on Twitter a few weeks ago or a few months ago, and I pointed this out, and he just got really pissed off at me. Uh, I think, and I pointed out to him that Peterson, I think Peterson, he's playing a game. He's like it's lying by omission. He's not. He doesn't openly state what his agenda is. He does not openly state that he is a Jungian Gnostic, which if you know what to listen to, it's very obvious. And my friend was challenging me. He's like, well, you like he's like challenging me, like, because like philosophers only want to look at the facts, and that's like the very fact that he doesn't admit it to me is very telling.
Yeah.
Like his hyping of Dostoevsky and Crime and Punishment. And I said, as a psychologist, this is incredibly disingenuous to associate psychopathy with atheism. You know,
Yes. Yeah, no,
so
I hate that. I feel like that is the lowest form of attack. I can't believe that people could actually, genuinely still in this day and age peddle narratives like that, like atheists eat babies, atheists are worse than rapists. There was actually a survey where some Americans thought that atheists were on par with rapists, and probably racists as well. But yeah, and what was that? I saw something. Yeah, and then again, that link between atheism and all these crimes against humanity done in the name of communism and things like that, and or even Hitler. And it's like, no, this is being, as you said, very, very disingenuous and intellectually dishonest.
Well, if you look at the communist regimes, yes, they were atheists, but it wasn't atheism that made them commit these atrocities. They just don't want competing ideologies. So
yeah, exactly. And all of these people as well, like Stalin took on like a godlike, they've all got messiah complexes in their own way as well, and it becomes very cult and godlike figures at the head, and it's very much hierarchical and all of that. But yeah, so I just don't engage anymore with comments like that, because even when it, like, things like evolution, when you're starting at the basic there as well, like somebody is just not willing to accept or engage with actually what we have as like the ground reality, like facts proven beyond doubt, and they're just still like, no, show me a monkey turning into a human.
well,
But yeah.
there was another book by Richard Dawkins. Forgive me, I can't remember the title, but he talks about we can see evolution in action, and he gives some examples from nature. That I think it was guppies. Like if you put guppies in a tank and with a predator, and like whatever the color of the background is, their spots will change within one generation or another of babies to match the background and protect them from the predator. So you can see it in action.
Yeah, exactly. Especially on the level like that, for example, you see like these tribes in Indonesia where, they live solely on the water, and these kids can dive to depths because just over those few generations, their lung capacity has developed far beyond yours or mine would be. So yeah, you can see it on a micro level like that as well. I just want to see if there's any comment. Okay. Hitler had a massive messiah complex. He genuinely thought he was chosen for something big. Messianic thought is not consistent with the atheistic worldview. Yeah, exactly. Definitely.
Well, what was printed on the belts of the SS troops? God is with us.
There we go. There we go. Somebody made a comment, and I think this is a good transition point. Jason. So John Stopman, also a great mod on the channel, thanks for being here, says Atheist Alliance International went from 1.69 subscribers to 1.7k. Progress comes in small steps, and every step forward is as important as any previous one. So Jason, I'm going to share your YouTube channel here. Can you tell us, like, A, what I wanted to say is how is it all going? And B, are you hopeful? Are you coming across more and more people who are willing to talk and share their stories and seeing religion for what it is? And, how is that all going?
I wasn't aware we've been up to 1.7. The last time I looked, we were about 1,000. So that's a good number. I've been really busy lately. So you and I have been trying to have this conversation now for about 3 or 4 weeks, but
Yeah.
we're both just incredibly busy. My job is I don't think I've done a podcast for about 3 or 4 weeks now, just because I've been so incredibly busy at work. Plus I've had, there were holidays here in Thailand. And so, I need to do one for next week because there's banned books week coming up in the US, I believe. So I think I did 2 podcasts in a row. Like the 2 last ones I think that are there came out right after the Roe v. Wade discussion. So I had a chat with Professor Dawes, who was a former Catholic priest, about sort of the church's attitude towards abortion and procreation, and then a woman from recovering from religion in the U.S. And we talked about the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the U.S. So I like to talk to interesting people. So I try to talk to professors to get some good scholarship. I try to talk to regular people who are active in the community. Who else I talked to? I did it. Steven Pinker was kind enough to come on the show last December and talk about his recent book. So
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think I've actually watched that talk. That was brilliant. Yeah, I think I actually watched that before.
And had you on, other atheist podcasters. So I try to give a stage to people who are out there, maybe some up and coming writers or up and coming podcasters who, if they can come on the AAI podcast and maybe get out to a wider audience and give people a hand up if I can. So
Yeah, and I just want to say I will post the link to the fundraiser as well. But if you go onto Atheist Alliance International's YouTube page, the fundraiser is literally the pinned video. But please, if you can, do donate, because they do immensely important and good work. And if you know anything about this area of work and this line of speaking out, there are people who literally have no way out when they leave religion behind, and to give them a safe space, because it's not always easy to, claim asylum and go down all these varying routes. And a lot of the time, people who have left religion behind, especially people like ex-Muslims who were just coming up now as an actual like label and as a force to be reckoned with. But you are at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to finding ways to get out of your country and, start a new life and things like that. So all of these organizations that are coming together and facilitating these channels are so vastly important to this movement, because we can sit here and talk all day, but actually doing something and actually acting and making an impact, a visible impact in somebody's life by removing them from a situation which is holding them back in every way possible is literally like this is the work of foot soldiers of this movement. So thank you, Jason, for everything you do, and for all the discussions you have, and for the books that you write, and for imparting knowledge. I really appreciate it. I would like to ask, do you have any final kind of closing remarks that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Just want to say thanks for having me on the show. And I would encourage people, if they're interested in the history, like especially of Islam, go read the New Cambridge History of Islam. The information is out there. It can't be hidden anymore. Some of the scholarship is amazing. Some of it is better than others. Like some writers are really, really dense and hard to get through, but some of it is pretty good. So I would just, can you hear the thunder?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I personally, I only about 2 years ago, I came across the term intellectual atheist, and I never had heard that term. And that kind of describes me, because for me, atheism is the intellectual side, the history of how we got here, and how religions formed and developed. So I think it's quite so if you're into that side of things, like, go read it.
Yeah, I mean, that is right up my street. I'm so into this. As I said, if I could actually have time to study the history of all religions, I would love to. Little Catfee, I hope you feel better soon. Thank you so much for your donation earlier. Little Catfee is saying, really enjoying this guest. By the way, didn't expect to hear so much about Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam. Yeah, I know. I literally love talking to you, Jason, because I mean, the fact that you've got enough information about, I could literally jump from different religions and you'd know things about all of them. So is there a fun fact you could leave us with about one of these religions that we might not know?
Probably nothing that I haven't already touched on, but maybe I think with Judaism, that Judaism has undergone multiple what I called them turning points. I actually did a presentation to a church, a Universalist church in Hong Kong several years ago, that was very well received. And I just documented all these various turning points, like how it was basically on the ideas of heaven and hell. Like, where did this idea of heaven and hell come from? And so I went through, starting like how Judaism, where it started, and what were these various turning points, such as the Babylonian exile, where they become exposed to Persian Zoroastrianism, and then you come in the Second Temple era, and then you have the apocalyptic era in the Book of Daniel, where beliefs in the afterlife start to emerge. That because they see during the Maccabean revolt, they see their culture being annihilated by all these Greek influences, and so the messianic concept morphs from a belief that the messianic kingdom will be here to a messianic afterlife. And then so the good Jews get to go to heaven, but where do we do with the bad Jews? So, like, hell.
Gehenna.
And so I went through like these major turning points. So you have like the Josianic reforms in 622, which basically encoded monotheism for the first time. Again, it was a king. There's a great book called The Bible on Earth. There's also a documentary series. There's actually two documentary series. There's a History Channel American version, and there's a European 4-part version. Mm-hmm. In the American version, History Channel version, this one professor, Baruch Alpern, makes a really great point. He says, the the temple in Jerusalem, which just happens to sit in the backyard of the royal palace. And I thought that was great insight. So
Yeah. No, that's honestly so fascinating. I'm as well because so just a quick question: did Zoroastrianism have a concept of hell?
probably, yeah.
Okay,
So that's
because when
actually one of the idea for my next book that I want to do is I actually want to do a book on the history of all religions, like what were the origins and evolutions of all the religions, and sort of
yeah,
look at Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and sort of do them all.
that is going to be such a great read. Like if it's going to be that comprehensive as well. Wow, Jason, you're doing some really, really good work. More power to you.
I have time. That's the problem. I've so that my book, the chapter on the rise of the Vatican, I got up to like 1930. So I started a new job in October of last year, and I was up to 1930 in the history of the Vatican, and I've only written 3 pages in the last year just because I'm just so busy at work. Even today, I wanted to work on it this afternoon, and then I just fell asleep because I'm so exhausted. So
Oh
I'm trying to
no.
find time to get. So I'm writing I'm writing the section now on the history of the Nazis and World War II and the Vatican, and then up to the present day. So I'm hoping I can get that done in the next couple of months. So.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Well, I wish you all the best, and please do let us know because we'd love to have you on and talk about your books as soon as they're getting released or published, or whenever you want to kind of just deep dive into any of those topics. Like even for example, just the concept of hell in Judaism, like looking back where it didn't exist at first, and then it was Gehenna just for like a pit that was actually a physical pit where
Yeah.
bodies used to
Well,
be.
Well,
And
it used to be because that was the altar where they burned children as sacrifices in the
exactly.
pre-monotheistic days, and then it sort of became the garbage dump of Jerusalem, and garbage dump was always on fire, so it became imagined as the portal to hell, and then it becomes hell in the European Bibles after the Gutenberg press, because previously it had been Hades or Gehenna, which have these connotations in the original language, but it loses something in the translation, right? So.
Exactly. Yeah. And Islam kind of just jumped on that concept. Gehenna became Jahannam in Arabic, and there we have it today. And then all those punishments are just barbaric. So we won't end on that note. Horace Sultan is saying, don't forget the Aboriginal religions. Yeah, actually, that's
Yeah.
a fair point, Jason. Have you looked into that at all?
Not in Australia, if that's what he means by Aboriginal, other
Okay.
than other than the ones that I studied for North Americans. But yeah, but what I would actually like to do is to enlist some professors, like the professors who are experts in those fields. It's like
Yeah.
you write the chapter, and then I will edit it all together. So rather
Oh,
because it would
yeah.
probably take me a lifetime to write it, because I don't have the expertise,
Yeah. To research
especially.
and write it would take a
So
fair bit
it's
of
like,
time.
find a Hindu expert and a Buddhist expert and a Zoroastrian expert and let them, and I'll just do an edit. So,
Yeah,
but we'll see.
that's a brilliant idea. I really, really hope that comes together. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Already hit thrice. Thank you. Yeah, please don't forget to like and share the stream. Everybody, thank you so much. Everybody loved this show, Jason. We should do this more often. We should
It's
pick your
nice
brain
to
more often.
it's
My
nice to see
audience is
this kind
loving
of
it.
it's nice to see this kind of reaction. So, yeah, I think this stuff is fascinating. So, but a lot of atheists are just they're not into that sort of historical side of things. So it's nice to see that it resonates with some people. So.
Oh yeah, no, on this channel, I don't know, I'm guessing my audience are like me because I absolutely live for this stuff. The second I realized Islam was false, I was like, that's it. How the hell did this come about? And how was this all put together? And how is this man conned this many people for this long? And it lends you straight back to the history. And I mean, it's so part and parcel of, I'd say, human psychological evolution and just the lived human experience in general. So if you're studying just even human geography or human psychology, religion and the importance it had for when we were literally like living in trees and hunter gatherers, and it served a purpose. So when you're riding through the desert late at night, with nothing around you but pure darkness, you are going to want to hope that there is a God there that taking care of you, and you are going to want to believe that the mirage exists and that's real water that you're coming to. So the history of religion is so intertwined with us and the way we live, and I just think it's of paramount importance and too much to look over. And when you look into the history of religion, you also realize how it's got the fingerprints of man all over it. So it really helps you to see that side of things. And again, that's where I hope people will go to just free themselves from the shackles of religion. So I think discussions like this are extremely beneficial in that sense. I actually think this is more important than going head on, like just head to head debating with a Muslim who is not willing to budge from their position and they've already presupposed, the truth. I think this is more beneficial if people hear us talking and just ideas are flowing, and then you go and do some research. Maybe that's better than somebody yelling at you saying your religion isn't true because your prophet married a 6-year-old. So thank you, Jason, because you're helping facilitate our movement as well, and just the wider atheistic, rational movement in general. But yeah, thank you.
Just quickly on the psychological
Sure.
point, on my Medium page, I do have 2 articles on the psychology. One called The Psychology of Faith, and another on the big history of religion that sort of looks at how religion formed, like the sociological, anthropological, that kind of stuff. So if people are interested in that, those articles are there as well.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm gonna jump onto that after this stream because you've really piqued my interest. This is so my cup of tea. But Jason, if we can talk afterwards, and then I can get these links as well and pin them all in the description, so that the audience can also see that as well. But yeah, thanks everybody for being here. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Have a fabulous weekend. I will see you for Sunday Scoop tomorrow, and we'll see Jason again very soon. Bye, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.